and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Show. I'm Adam Turinas. I'm your host for today. I want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to our partners, Hinge, for helping us with delivering this podcast to you. And I also want to give a big thank you to you for listening or for watching, however you're consuming these hopeful, insightful things that we're going to share with you over the next 20 minutes or so. So today, my guest is my colleague, Paul Vandre. Paul is a longtime digital marketer. And the topic we're going to talk about today is cookies. So cookies, you know, what are they? I'm sure most people know what they are, but at least we'll do that, just level set a bit about what cookies are. But more importantly, what is going on with cookies? What are the things you need to be thinking about in 2024? And what are some of the mitigation strategies that you can take? So, Paul, welcome. So great to have you on the show.
It's good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Good. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's get into all about cookies.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I've been doing digital marketing for several years now. Have mostly worked in startups, but have worked in bigger companies. I've worked in agencies. I've been all around. So have experience in a lot of B2B. Which is where I prefer to be working, and love working in health tech. That's definitely my favorite area.
Cool. Excellent. All right. Let's just a little bit of a level set for people. What are cookies? Why are they important?
Yeah. So cookies have been with the internet for a long time. And cookies are essentially the little pieces of information that are dropped on a browser that allow people to be able to see and learn about the activity that you're doing on websites. And there's really, especially when you're talking about this cookie crisis or this cookie evolution, there's really two types of cookies that I think are maybe sometimes misunderstood, but they're going to be impacted very differently by this evolution of cookies. So the first type of cookies would be first-party cookies. So these are cookies that are essentially dropped on a browser by a website that are then the only place that gets access to that information would be the website itself. So it's not shared outside of the website. So that would be things that allow the internet to just work more smoothly. Things like storing your login information, saving things in your cart after you've left the website, so when you come back, that all that stuff is still there. Their first-party cookies have been really helpful for making the internet more usable and making it much more, especially transactional from an e-commerce perspective. I think we often take for granted how valuable first-party cookies really are. And there's much less concern about first-party cookies because that data is being shared and often it's much more private. And there's less security concerns with first-party cookies. Third-party cookies, however, are the ones that have become under attack and that are starting to become phased out. Yeah. So starting actually as of tomorrow, January 4th, Google Chrome is applying an update to their Chrome browser, which I think about 70% of the world uses Chrome. So Chrome is the dominant browser. About 1% or 1% of those users will have a feature turned on to their browser that will disable third-party cookies. And there's other browsers that have already been doing this action, but it's getting a lot of attention now because Chrome is the big behemoth. And so this is going to have a really big impact. And they say by Q3, the plan is to have third-party cookies phased out entirely. And so third-party cookies are different because third-party cookies are cookies that are shared with other websites. So for example, you could be going to a website, you could be doing something on that website. Let's say you're buying a pair of shoes. If there's a cookie, for example, from Facebook on that website, then Facebook can be seeing what you're doing on that website, even though you're not on Facebook. Right. So this is giving other websites, other advertisers, other providers access to information about what you're doing on the internet. And often that's done without your consent. And the real concern that people have with that is obviously privacy. So it's giving information about your browsing activity to other people that maybe you don't even know about. And also there's a lot of concerns around security because it creates vulnerabilities that can be taken advantage of by groups or organizations that are trying to access privacy data. So because of that, third-party data or third-party cookies is starting to be phased out. And by the end of 2024, we're going to be largely moving towards a non-third-party cookie world.
I see. Oh, right. Okay, got it. You said privacy is behind it. I kind of get the impression it mostly started in Europe with GDPR. Now it's been driven in the US by California's privacy law regulations, what's CCPA, and generally, a desire to adhere to best practice. Is that what's behind it?
I think that was an accelerant. I think that the underlying concerns about privacy have been there, but the desire to remain compliant with these laws has made the acceleration a lot quicker to be able to turn this into the actions that we're starting to see, especially from these major tech companies. So yeah, but privacy there's been concerns about this for a while, but now there's a real momentum and we're moving to the point where real change is starting to take place.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the shoes of our marketing brethren. You run a variety of different programs. You've got people coming to your website. You're dropping cookies on them when they come to the website. You might be using advertising on LinkedIn, maybe even running some tracking codes as followed people around on Facebook. There are maybe other things that you're doing, like targeting devices. What is this change in regulation where Chrome switches off third-party cookies for you? And by the way, first clarification, is it sort of like, is it giving the option as a user to switch off third-party cookies, or is it just making them go away?
It's making it the default. So
you've actually got to make an avert thing to switch it on.
Yeah, exactly. So my understanding is those 1%, they're going to log in tomorrow, and there's going to be a functionality that's turned on that if they don't turn it off, they're no longer going to be able to have third-party cookies that are dropped on their browser.
Starts 1%, and by the end of Q3, it's everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And there's been a lot of delays with this Google launch. The timelines are a little bit squishy, but this is the first real, actual tangible change that's happened to Chrome, and it's kicking off tomorrow.
I see. Got it. So let's project forward to Q4 this year. How does what you're able to do as a marketer change? What's going to be different?
So I think some of it is still a little bit to be determined. So the one thing that we do know is that it's going to be harder to capture things like cross-device data. So that means someone would potentially log into your website on their mobile phone, and then they're going to come back and look at it on a desktop. And a lot of the times, third-party tracking solutions have allowed those actions to be kind of followed across devices. It's going to be a lot harder to do things like retargeting. So if someone visits your website, maybe doesn't do the desired action that you want them to do, then you'll be serving them ads when they're on other websites that are built based off of the actions that they took on your site. So the caveat to this is that Google obviously is really invested in facilitating advertisers, right? And facilitating marketers. So they've been working hard to essentially try to recreate some of the things that you can do currently with third-party cookies through solutions that they're essentially doing through open APIs. So they're creating solutions essentially to allow you to still do some forms of retargeting. And the difference, what they're trying to do essentially is they're taking this third-party data that used to be shared out to advertisers and to share it out to websites, and they're just essentially putting all that data on the browser alone. So all these, essentially what will happen is your browser is going to know a lot of information about you, but the advertisers and the websites aren't going to know as much. And so the browser will then have an auction that will take place on your browser, but it's only on your browser, and you won't be able to see what's happening. So you won't know what the interests are that are driving it, but the browser will host an auction that will serve ads to you based off of the actions that you've been taking. So this is kind of where things are moving, is it's taking data from sharing it out and keeping it hosted essentially on your computer, on your browser.
So basically, Google's taken something which was sort of like not an existential crisis, but certainly a serious threat to their advertising business.
For sure, yeah.
And then they've turned it into something which effectively creates almost like a walled garden.
Yes and no. I mean, they are doing these from an open API perspective, right? So they aren't trying to say that they're the only ones that are going to be able to do this, but they're trying to build the infrastructure to allow this to happen so that you can, again, do cross-device tracking. So it's more things like universal IDs that are following people through information that isn't like an email address where it's an actual name. So what we may be moving from is something like, right now, almost everything is driven by an email address. When you logged in with your email address, then that's what is kind of a universal unifier ID. Right. But with things like hashed email addresses, you can take an email address, you can apply essentially a layer of coding to it. And so an email address becomes a series of 36 numbers and letters.
Yeah.
And so anything that's private, anything that it reveals, anything about your identity is now hidden behind essentially a coded a series of numbers and letters. And so that allows websites and advertisers to still potentially follow, but without any of that personal information that people are worried about is going to be revealing information that they don't want to be revealed about themselves.
I see. Got it. Okay. That's interesting. So actually, it could be a better solution for marketers and for individuals as well.
I think it's a better solution. It may not fully recreate the level of detail within tracking and advertising that we've had historically, but I think it's going to force advertisers to be more creative. It's going to put a real emphasis still on first-party data, which I think is really valuable.
By first-party data, you mean people signing up for your email, you're signing up for your e-newsletter, or coming to your website, filling out a form, or just
exactly, because we're still going to know a lot about what they're doing on our website, because those types of first-party cookies that track what's happening on your site, those aren't going away with these changes. So we'll still know where people are browsing. We'll still know what content they're interested in. But I think beyond that, a lot of what we've done before is we've been able to augment that information through third-party cookie information. But I think what we're seeing now is the desire for websites and advertisers to curate that information themselves. So have more of a relationship, a dialogue with your customers. Ask them what they're interested in. Do surveys and other things that allow you to grow your first-party data about your consumers so that you have your own database of information about your consumers that allows you to then go and market to them in a customized, individualized way. And it's information that they're opting to give to you as opposed to being given to you surreptitiously.
Yeah. So anybody who's uses HubSpot and uses the full HubSpot stack, not just the CRM or just forms on the website, but it can track an individual user, every single action that they take on the website once they've actually got their identification. Does that change with this, or is that because that's first-party cookies, it doesn't get affected?
Yeah, that doesn't really get us affected as much. So the biggest real kind of struggles that advertisers have to grapple with as a result of the third-party cookies going away are things like cross-device tracking, because those are things that are happening outside necessarily of your website or that aren't in a single session, right? So, and then the other thing is this ability to personalize advertising based off of what people are doing. And really, it's not necessarily the advertisers that are being affected. It's the tools that they use to advertise, right? Those tools are no longer being able to just grab data from all over the internet, right? When you have that like button from Facebook on your website, that like button is also capturing information about the user's activity that's sending that to Facebook so that they can then use that to help them to be able to create this data that they use for targeting. And the same for Google Ads and all these other ad platforms. So those platforms are working hard to evolve to be able to kind of recreate some of the tools, but it's going to be an evolution, and it's going to be a little bit of a push and pull, I think, with regulators and also just with the consumers about what we're comfortable with, what they're comfortable with. And I think it's going to evolve quite a bit still in the next few years.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about an immediate personal thing that happens is that I noticed that if my wife and the computer upstairs, I don't know, searches for some new china or something like this, suddenly on my Facebook on my phone, I start seeing ads for China. Like, why am I seeing ads for China? And then my wife starts talking to me about it. Say, well, wait a second. I saw an ad for that. It's like, oh, I see why, right? And that's actually that's probably more related to the IP address. So that's different, right?
Potentially. Yeah. And there's probably going to be less of the extreme creep out moments for consumers where it's like, well, how did you know that about me? Right. I think it's going to be hopefully harder for that to happen as that personal data becomes a little bit more protected.
Right. Got it. Okay. And when it comes to ABM, we're all pretty passionate about ABM, and you play around. We use intent data carefully. Intent data is not perfect, but how does intent data get affected by this? I mean, like, the companies like Bombora that have got this collective, this aggregate, they pool aggregate data from thousands of different B2B websites. How are they going to get impacted by this?
I think that's They're going to be impacted for sure. And some of it, I think, is still it's a little bit up in the air. But what they're really leaning towards more is trying to build sources to be able to capture more first party data, that they can use. They're also, like you mentioned before, leaning into kind of IP focused tracking. So being able to track based off of an IP address as opposed to tracking based off of any kind of personal private information. And if you look, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, the other thing I was to say is that the way that sources like Bombora work is that, first of all, they're not providing data on individuals. They're providing data at the account level. And then the second thing is that I believe that a lot of the data that they're aggregating is permission based. So it's based on people having filled out forms and giving explicit permission on other people's websites. So for that reason, I guess at that point, you can still, if you give it permission to put a cookie, to drop a cookie, I guess it gets around. Well, maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
No, I do think that's going to be a big part of it, is a permission-led data collection. Right. So as long as you're able to inform your consumers about what it is that you're collecting from them, then there may still be opportunities to move to that where you can collect and share data still.
Yeah. Okay. So this has been great. It's been super helpful. Is there anything else on cookies that we haven't covered that marketers need to think about?
I would say just go check out the Google Privacy Sandbox, which is essentially where they're continuously updating it with what they're working on to be able to try to help the advertisers and websites to be able to be ready for their transition. And it gives both a marketing level and more technical level type data. So if you're someone that's in charge of being able to update the website from a backend, then there's going to be plenty of data and API information that will help you to be able to be prepared for those sorts of transitions. But then they also have 2 to 3 minute explainer videos that are more marketer focused that will help you to understand the ramifications of some of these changes. And it'll put you in a place to be able to speak to them intelligently and also think about maybe where some of your gaps might be from both like an expertise perspective to be able to be ready for some of the changes that are going to need to be happening.
Well, this is great. In fact, what we'll do is in the show notes for the podcast and for the video, if you're watching on the video, we'll include links to some of these resources that Paul's referring to, and also links to points of view or web pages from Demandbase and Bombora, 6th Sense, and those guys on how they're going to be addressing cookies going forward. So, Paul, thank you. Much appreciated. And great to have you on the show. And I'm sure we'll have you back for other things in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Okay. Thank you again to you for listening. Hope this was helpful to you. If you're watching the video, you want to listen to the podcast, you can subscribe on Apple or on Spotify. And if you're listening to this podcast and you want to see what we look like, Paul's much better looking than me. But anyway, whatever, you can see what we look like on the YouTube. And if you've got any ideas for shows, things that you want us to cover, just let me know. Email me at adam@healthlaunchpad.com. And do subscribe. We've got tons more stuff coming up. We're going to be doing one of these a week. I think the next show that we're going to be doing is actually a live show, which is going to be, we're going to have Mike Milliard, who is the executive editor from HIT Media, from HIMS Media, from HIT News, who's going to be on the show in the next couple of weeks. And he'll be talking about big trends, healthcare IT trends for 2024. So be sure to check that out. And with that, I will say goodbye.